If you want to destroy your credibility in seconds, just do what Jordan Peterson did when asked one simple question.
How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Today, we're going to be examining 7 reasoning errors Jordan Peterson made so that you can avoid these catastrophic mistakes. Alright, so Jordan Peterson, the Christian non-Christian, the believer non-believer, the man who refuses to answer whether he actually believes in God, has just appeared on Jubilee's Surrounded series. And I'm sure you're absolutely shocked that I'm covering this, given that I've analysed Peterson's theological word salad more times than he's redefined the word God.
And what do you mean, God?
The original title was 1 Christian versus 25 Atheists, but then they changed it to Jordan Peterson versus 25 Atheists.
Before the production, people all got emails, invitations, where the production title was 1 Christian versus 20 or 25 atheists.
And honestly, that title change alone tells you everything you need to know about Peterson's relationship with Christianity. Even Jubilee couldn't figure out what he actually believes. Now, there is so much to unpack in this intellectual train wreck that I'm going to need multiple videos to properly dissect all the fallacies, contradictions, and rhetorical sleights of hand. And to be straight with you, I'll keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them, until we've examined every angle of this fascinating disaster, if you wish. So let's dive into the very first interaction, because Peterson wastes no time at all deploying his signature move, the no true Scotsman fallacy, served with a side of condescension.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Bold, provocative, completely unfalsifiable, classic Peterson. Now, the first person to challenge this claim isn't some edgy Reddit atheist who just discovered Richard Dawkins. This is Luke, someone who was training to become a traditional Catholic priest. Let me emphasize this, a traditional Catholic priest, not some liberal seminary student who thinks that the resurrection is a metaphor. Here's how he put it.
My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it.
So this man didn't just dip his toes into Christianity, he did a theological cannonball into the deep end. Daily mass, daily rosary, deep dives into the magisterium, years studying biblical hermeneutics. If there's a checklist for understanding Christianity, this guy ticked every box with the dedication of someone preparing for a lifetime of service. So how does our supposedly brilliant psychologist respond to someone who clearly, demonstrably, understands what they rejected? Does he ask probing questions? Does he explore what specific theological or philosophical issues led this devoted seminarian away from faith? Maybe it was the problem of an infinite punishment for finite sins. Perhaps the Bible's explicit endorsement of slavery in Exodus and Leviticus. Could it have been the divinely commanded genocide in Canaan, where God orders the slaughter of children and infants? These are serious theological problems that drive thoughtful believers away from faith. But no.
Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
Stop. Rewind. Play that again. Because the ex-seminarian didn't say he feels like he missed something. Luke is using Peterson's own logic against him. If Peterson's claim is true, then logically, this deeply educated man must have missed something. It's a rhetorical question exposing the absurdity of Peterson's position. But Peterson, with breathtaking condescension that even his most devoted fans would recognize as intellectual dishonesty in anyone else, immediately deploys his favorite fallacy, the no true Scotsman. The message is crystal clear. You didn't find God because you weren't really looking. If you were really looking, and I mean really, really looking, you would have found him. It's the theological equivalent of she goes to another school, you wouldn't know her.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out.
Translation, I have absolutely no idea what you did wrong, but my entire worldview depends on you having done something wrong, so therefore you must have done something wrong. This is where Peterson's supposed intellectual rigor crumbles faster than a communion wafer in holy water. Like, seriously, and this is a comment that refers to, you know, his whole presence on Jubilee. What side of the bed did he get up on? He's so deeply unhappy. He needs atheism in his life, I'm telling you. But our ex-seminarian came prepared for this exact nonsense.
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be.
Wonderful. He identifies the fallacy, names it, and explains it perfectly in one sentence. And you know what? Let's pause here because I want everyone, and if I may, especially the Christians watching, to truly feel why this rhetorical move is so disappointing to atheists. We hear this constantly, this dismissive, you just didn't do it right response. So let me demonstrate the absurdity by applying Peterson's exact logic to a different religion, and watch how quickly it falls apart. Suppose a Muslim scholar said to you, Christians reject Islam, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. And before you can even explain that you've studied the Quran, you've compared it to the Bible, you've prayed about it and found Christianity more compelling, before hearing any of your reasons, this scholar immediately diagnoses that your aim was off in approaching Islam. That if you really understood the Quran, and I mean really, really understood it, you'd be praying towards Mecca 5 times a day. You'd laugh them out of the room, and so should you. You'd recognize it as immediately circular reasoning that's so blatant it's practically spherical. You don't believe because you studied it wrong, and I know that you studied it wrong because you don't believe. Just to be clear about the circular reasoning here, it's when your conclusion is hidden in one of your premises. So Peterson's argument is essentially people who seek God properly find God, and we know that they sought properly because they found God. The conclusion, they sought God properly, is proven by the outcome, finding God, which is then used to prove the conclusion. It's a logical snake eating its own tail. This isn't sophisticated theology. It's not deep psychology. It's the argumentative equivalent of a child putting their fingers in their ears and yelling, "La la la, I can't hear you." Luke then delivers the killing blow. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. While browsing Ground News with my morning coffee, I skipped the top stories, Donald Trump being sworn in as the US president, and took a good look at today's blind spots, a wonderful feature that highlights the stories that are being disproportionately reported by the left or the right. It's tools like these why Ground News has become an indispensable part of my daily routine. You can follow along at ground.news/rationality. For the left, I can see that they're underreporting Trump's administration cancelling flights for 1,600 Afghan refugees, as Trump himself claims he was saved by God to make America great again, and the ADL says that Elon Musk's awkward hand gesture was not a Nazi salute. Meanwhile, the right evidently couldn't care less about North Korea's casualties in Russia's Kursk, Trump instructing aides to arrange a call with Putin, and China importing a record amount of Russian crude oil. And of course, for any of these stories, we can click through and get a concise summary and gauge how each outlet presents the facts. For instance, while all coverage reports on China's increased Russian oil imports, their framing varies significantly. Reuters emphasises the 9% drop in Saudi Arabian purchases. Bloomberg, meanwhile, focuses on how Asian processors are expanding their search for alternative oil sources following the recent US sanctions targeting Russian oil. We get the same facts, but different story. In today's world of competing headlines and curated narratives, finding unbiased news can feel impossible. That's why I rely on Ground News. They cut through the noise to deliver just the facts. By signing up through this link, you'll not only gain access to balanced news coverage, but you'll also support the Rationality Rules team. Thanks.
How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
What a brilliant surgical question, one that exposes the entire charade. Peterson has known this man for approximately 45 seconds, and he's already diagnosed a failure in his years-long spiritual journey, not based on evidence, not based on careful questioning, based purely on the fact that this journey didn't end where Peterson's ideology demands it must end. Watch Jordan scramble.
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind.
Bro, the intellectual whiplash here could snap your neck. He's just spent a minute telling this man that his aim was off and that he didn't understand what he rejected. But now suddenly he's not claiming to understand what was going on in this guy's mind. And then comes the false equivalence. As a reminder, a false equivalence is when someone treats two fundamentally different things as if they're comparable or carry equal weight. It's like a therapist saying, well, you claim to feel sad, and I claim that you have unresolved childhood trauma. These are both just claims about mental states, so they're equally valid. No, they're not. One person is reporting their own experience. The other is making a diagnosis about someone else's mind. The authority and evidence required for each is completely different. Watch Peterson try this trick. When an atheist says, I don't believe God exists, they're making a claim about their own mental state, their own evaluation of evidence. It's a first-person report. Here's what I believe based on what I've seen. But when Peterson says, you don't understand what you're rejecting, he's making a claim about the other person's comprehension, their intelligence, their sincerity, their entire intellectual journey. It's a third-person diagnosis. Here's what's wrong with your thinking. If you were thinking correctly, you couldn't possibly reject my view. These aren't remotely equivalent. One is a statement about personal belief. The other is a condescending diagnosis of someone else's supposed intellectual failures. But Peterson tries to pass them off as the same type of generic claim to deflect the arrogance of his position. But wait, there's more. Peterson isn't done psychoanalyzing atheists he's never met.
My experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
There it is, the classic Peterson false dichotomy. According to him, atheists fall into exactly two categories. One, too stupid to understand God properly. That's the reductive notion category. Two, too emotionally damaged to think clearly, the hurt and angry category. Notice what's missing. The possibility, the mere possibility, that someone could understand Christianity perfectly well and reject it for rational reasons. Nope, in Peterson's world, that category doesn't exist. To get technical, this is an example of a false dilemma fallacy combined with poisoning the well. The false dilemma, also called a false dichotomy, is when someone presents only two options when many more exist. Peterson is saying that atheists are either intellectually deficient or emotionally damaged. But what about atheists who understand Christianity perfectly well and reject it for logical reasons? What about those who see contradictions between Christian claims and observed reality? These possibilities simply don't exist in Peterson's binary world. And poisoning the well is when you present negative information about someone before they speak, attempting to discredit anything they might say. By preemptively declaring that all atheists either can't understand or are too hurt to think clearly, he's ensuring that any argument an atheist makes can be dismissed. It's like a doctor announcing that the next patient that comes in is either too stupid to describe their symptoms accurately or too hysterical to be trusted. All this before you've even walked into the room. And here's the beautiful irony. This is just wonderful. Luke immediately flips this right back on Peterson.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Boom. Luke just called out Peterson's hypocrisy with surgical precision. And this isn't an isolated incident. Peterson has expressed this view multiple times over the years. In his debate with Matt Dillahunty, when asked to define an atheist, Peterson literally said it would be Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, a murderer who wants to prove he can kill without consequence.
What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
Think about that. Peterson's definition of an atheist is a murderer, and like one that knows he can get away with it. But here's the problem for Luke. Peterson hasn't explicitly said this in this conversation, so he can weasel out of it. Watch what happens next. Instead of addressing Luke's devastating point, Peterson completely changes the subject.
Let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting?
Classic deflection. When cornered, demand that your opponent define terms while you've spent the entire conversation refusing to define your own. This is Peterson's signature move. When the dialect isn't going his way, he starts asking, "Oh, what do you mean by that basic word?" until the conversation has completely shifted away from the original point.
What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God?
It's intellectual three-card Monty. Watch the original criticism disappear as he shuffles definitions around, and suddenly you're not talking about his fallacious reasoning anymore. You're stuck defining words everyone already understands. Well, everyone but Jordan. Luke gives a perfectly reasonable answer about how the average Christian understands God. All-powerful, all-perfect, involved in the world, wisdom through Christ. You get it. This is textbook classical theism. It's literally called classical theism. This is exactly what Thomas Aquinas articulated. It's what the vast majority of Christians throughout history and today believe. All those philosophical arguments for God's existence, the cosmological, teleological, ontological arguments, they're all trying to prove this God exists, at least in the long run, not some vague Petersonian abstraction. No one is confused here. No theologian scratches their head wondering, what could Luke possibly mean? No one, that is, except Jordan. And even many Christians have called out Peterson for this obfuscation, joining atheists like me in pointing out that his word games serves no one. But then Luke makes another brilliant observation.
It also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is.
This is crucial. Luke is pointing out that Peterson's God concept is so abstract and divorced from mainstream Christianity that it's barely recognizable as the same religion. Peterson's God is whatever you value most, or the unknowable infinite, or the voice of conscience, or the principle of voluntary sacrifice. It shapeshifts depending on what's rhetorically convenient. Meanwhile, actual Christians are praying to a personal God who they believe literally rose from the dead. The gap between Peterson's philosophical abstractions and lived Christianity is so vast you could drive a megachurch through it. But watch Peterson's response.
If everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
This is a straw man. A straw man fallacy is when you misrepresent someone's argument to make it easier to attack. You build a straw man version that's weaker than their actual position, knock it down, and pretend you've defeated their real argument. Luke's actual claim was, there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. He's pointing out the diversity of God concepts among believers. Peterson's strawman version is, if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. He's pretending that Luke said that these differences make communication impossible. Do you see the trick? Luke never said people can't communicate. He said they have different conceptions of God, which is obviously true. Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox Christians have fought literal wars over their differing God concepts. The 30 Years' War killed millions over theological differences. The Great Schism split Christianity in half. Even today, ask a Calvinist and an Armenian about predestination, or a Catholic and a Baptist about salvation, and watch the sparks fly. Peterson, of course, knows this. Of course he knows this. He knows denominations exist precisely because Christians can't agree on fundamental aspects of their faith. But acknowledging this would undermine his argument. So he pretends that Luke said something absurd about communication being impossible. It's intellectual dishonesty dressed up as philosophical precision. It's bullshit. Following this, Peterson launches into a rambling story about Moses getting a glimpse of God's back. But Luke, God bless him, isn't having any of it.
When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views, and it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
This is Philosophy of Interpretation 101. The Bible doesn't interpret itself. Different traditions read these stories completely differently. But watch Peterson's bad faith response.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant.
What? Luke said nothing of the sort. He's making a sophisticated point about hermeneutics, that we can't make definitive claims about what the Bible says without acknowledging the vast diversity of interpretations throughout Christian history. Different denominations read Moses completely differently. Some see him as a flawed but heroic leader, others as a prophet prefiguring Christ. Still others focus on his failures and disobedience. And here's the face-palming irony. Luke is exposing that Jordan is doing exactly what he just accused atheists of doing, being too reductive. You see, this is a classic Peterson tennis without the net. His default position is that atheists are far too literal and reductive in their biblical interpretation. When atheists point to verses that explicitly endorse slavery, and because of this, Christians have had no problem with slavery through most of human history. Where you can buy slaves, how hard you can beat them. Peterson insists this is such a low-resolution take, it's reductive. But when it suits him, suddenly he can make definitive statements about biblical characters like Moses. And when Luke clarifies that he's saying we can't know because we can't talk to the authors, Peterson throws a philosophical tantrum.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with, then I can't speak with you.
Jesus Christ. Notice the manipulation here. Luke is asking for intellectual humility about biblical interpretation. The very thing Jordan just demanded atheists should have. Remember, Peterson's whole opening was that atheists don't understand the complexity and depth of what they're rejecting. But when Luke demonstrates actual understanding of that complexity, pointing out the multiplicity of interpretations, suddenly Peterson can't handle it. He's demanding the very nuance from atheists that he refuses to apply himself. And he's threatening to take his ball and go home unless Luke accepts his interpretations uncritically. But get this, it gets worse. Peterson then goes on this lengthy tangent about Moses only seeing God's back, claiming this shows God is fundamentally unknowable and overwhelming. He concludes,
and that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story.
I mean, come on, Jordan. Please, isn't this the whole damn point Luke has been making? Let's think about this for a second. According to Peterson's own interpretation, the lesson Moses learns is that God is fundamentally unknowable and overwhelming. And where does Jordan get this message? From the Bible, which is supposedly a message from God. If God is truly unknowable, then Peterson has no grounds to say atheists are interpreting him wrong. Luke's entire point is that biblical interpretation is complex and contested, and Peterson's own example proves it. The irony is so thick that you could cut it with Occam's razor. And Peterson delivers all of this with overwhelming condescension, as if he's explaining something profound to a child, when in reality he stumbled into a logical contradiction that undermines his entire argument. The gaslighting alone is disgusting. Luke definitely deserved better than this. Luke tries one more time to pin Peterson down.
If you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes, but also in the same way I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion.
A great point, once again. If we define an atheist as someone who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, then, since most people are not dogmatic fundamentalists, boom, the majority of Christians are atheists. He's pointing out that Peterson's various definitions of God are so broad that they're meaningless. If everyone is religious by definition, the word loses all descriptive power. It doesn't mean anything. And Jordan's response? More deflection.
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
And there it is, the classic Peterson move. Make a vague, poetic statement that sounds profound but commits to nothing specific. What does establish a relationship with the infinite even mean? How would you verify if someone has done this? What distinguishes this from simply existing as a finite being? Luke nails it.
It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
The translation here is that your definitions are so idiosyncratic that we're not even having the conversation that normal Christians and atheists have. And then, mercifully, the audience votes Luke out, probably because he was making too much sense, and that's not what makes for viral content. So, in these opening exchanges, we've seen Peterson deploy an arsenal of rhetorical tricks. The no true Scotsman fallacy, false dichotomies, poisoning the well, straw man arguments, deflection and subject changing, semantic manipulation, threats to end the conversation when challenged, and putting words in opponents' mouths. And we are just getting started. The fact that Peterson shows his entire hand this early, that atheists are either stupid or damaged, reveals that he was never there for genuine dialogue. He came with his conclusion preloaded. Atheists bad, Peterson weird non-Christianity good. The tragedy is that there are genuine conversations to be had about meaning, mythology, and human psychology, but we'll never get there if one side enters assuming the other is composed of entirely damaged idiots who need Papa Peterson to explain what they really believe. And this is just the first interaction of the first claim that Peterson makes. As I said at the beginning, I'm more than happy to continue analysing this intellectual train wreck as long as you're interested in watching. There is so much to unpack. Peterson's meltdown with Danny.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
His inability to answer whether he's even Christian.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
His bizarre definition of worship that makes everyone religious.
You say atheists worship things. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
And so much more. If you want to see me continue this analysis, then please let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe. Like, it really does help. It lets me know that you want more content just like this. And if you're in a position to support the channel, that would be incredibly helpful. It means that I could hire more people to get these videos out faster. Because trust me, there's enough material to keep us busy for quite a while. Oh, and just before I go, you may have noticed that some of these cards have been making their way into the video. The reason for that is that I have made a card game called Debunked, which you can purchase. You can play, and it teaches you how the fallacies work, but more importantly, it's just a fun game. So if you're interested and you want to see more, click the link below for that as well. Thanks.